pre-1955 Holy Week. It's awesome. Today we're going to talk about it. A lot of us in the traditional movement, we know the year 1962. 1962 Missal. That, for most people, is the traditional Latin Mass. However, that 1962 Missal contains the Holy Week that was designed and modified really beginning in 1951, then promulgated 1955, some other rubrical modifications up into 1962. The principles of the Novus Ordo are already there in this Holy Week. So the Holy Week was the experiment in the 1950s to change the Roman Rite, because Holy Week is the heart and the oldest part of the Roman Rite. So today we're going to look at how Holy Week changed. We'll do a compare and contrast. We'll talk about the principles. We'll give you the timeline, and we'll make an apologetic at the end of why we should all return to the pre-1955 Holy Week, especially as traditionalists. I'm joined today with Timothy Flanders of Meaning of Catholic. Timothy, how are you?
Praise to Jesus Christ. Doing well, brother.
Good.
How you doing?
You ready to get, all these people say, oh, you just want to go back to the 50s. Actually, we want to go back to the 40s.
Good old World War II era.
There we go.
Yeah, 1940.
Yeah, because, when you think about, and we'll pray the Our Father in just a moment, when you think about it, the pre-55 Holy Week is the Holy Week that the little flower experienced her life. It's the Holy Week of Pius X. It's the Holy Week of Robert Bellarmine and Pius V. It's the Holy Week of Thomas Aquinas. Right?
Yeah,
this is the legacy of the Roman Rite.
Exactly. Yep.
So it's important. And you can't just in the 1950s say, well, we're going to cut this and we're going to add this. We're going to change this liturgical color on this day and change the time on this and add the people doing this. That's not how liturgy is supposed to work.
Yeah, this Holy Week only lasted for about 14 years before it was also superseded. So this is just a little blip on the radar that's still contained in our 62 Missal, as if that was the traditional, but that's just this little experiment that was only done within 2 decades. So yes. It's not as if we're, this is not even evolutionary if we consider the whole trad effort to restore the liturgy.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, the Novus Ordo Holy Week has been used more times than the 1951 Provisional up to 1969 Holy Week.
Right. This is actually even less mainstream or even less used. Yeah. So,
and then a lot of trads will say, oh, it doesn't matter. The 62 is just as good. I think after you watch today's show, you'll be like, oh, the 62 is not as good. We need to get back to the pre-55. All right, so we should go through the changes. Before we do, though, I want to just put on the screen the 1939 London, England Holy Week schedule. This is going to blow the mind of a lot of people because none of us, well, there's some of us that are old enough to remember the old Holy Week. But for everyone that wasn't alive then, it is a completely different world. So I'm going to put on Palm Sunday first. Here's Palm Sunday on the screen. So at 10 a.m., there was the blessing and distribution of the palms by the cardinal, followed by procession and high mass, in which the Passion of St. Matthew was sung. In the old Holy Week, Palm Sunday was the Gospel Passion of Matthew. Tuesday was the Gospel Passion of Mark. Wednesday was the Gospel Passion of Luke. So we're hitting them all. People say, well, you need the new lectionary because you're not getting everything. Look, the lectionary of the Mass is not to give you the Bible, all the Bible. That's Protestant. A 3-year lectionary is dumb. Why not have a 10-year lectionary if you're really concerned about it? The readings at the Mass are to prepare you to enter into the mystery that's being celebrated on that Sunday. It's arranged. So it's like a flower arrangement that's beautiful. It's not how many flowers can I stuff into a vase. There's an elegance to it. So here in Holy Week, we see that the Passion of Matthew, the Passion of Mark, and the Passion of Luke are read. On Good Friday, we'll get the Passion of John. So we're getting all four passions, lections from the Gospels on Palm Sunday. You'll notice that they throw in a low mass at 12:30 p.m. On Palm Sunday without a sermon. This is very common in the pre-conciliar church. Tuesday is just that high mass at 10:30 a.m. of Mark, and Wednesday is the high mass with Luke. Complin's at 5:15. Tenebrae. We need to talk about Tenebrae. Tenebrae appears here on Wednesday. Tenebrae is on Wednesday night, Thursday night, and Friday night. It is the anticipated matins and lauds chanted for the previous day. What happens in times of penance in the Roman Rite is all the divine office gets bumped up. So you'll be saying Compline around 5 p.m. You'll be saying Nones at maybe 11 a.m. or noon. The reason for this is fasting. Also, Thomas Aquinas says that in a penance day, you are to say Mass after, I think it's Nones. After Nones.
Yeah, it's known. Yeah.
Thomas Aquinas says that. And he says on feast days, it's said after Terce, which is 9 a.m. typically. And on other days, I think he says after Sext. This is the early teaching of the Roman Rite. Well, because of the fasting regulations, and Pius V said Masses should not begin after noon. For all of this to work, the divine office gets accordions crushed in and moved up. So as we look through Holy Week, you'll notice that everything is kind of getting smashed closer to the front of the day. That explains why. And this is why Matins and Lauds actually gets pushed, and pops out into the previous day. So that Lauds and Matins of Holy Thursday are being said on Wednesday at 5:30 p.m. And the lay people, this is something that it's hard for us to understand even as trads. The lay people in Holy Week were fascinated with Tenebrae, Stations of the Cross, and Passion plays for hundreds of years. You know, when you look at the great music that's produced by musical geniuses, they're not doing the Mass of Maundy Thursday or the Mass of Good Friday. They're doing the Tenebrae. They put all their effort in Tenebrae because that's what the people were fascinated by.
And then Tenebrae, when you do that service, it's dark and you're extinguishing more and more lights. And it's just getting darker and darker and darker.
It's dramatic.
And it's, that dramatic effect, the biggest part about that is the darkness. And so having that in the evening makes a great amount of sense because that keeps that darker and darkness. Definitely good point about the music. Pretty much my favorite piece of sacred music is Gregorio Allegri Miserere, which is a Tenebrae piece.
Absolutely.
So
and he created that masterpiece, not for Maundy Thursday, not for Good Friday, not for Easter Vigil. He created for Tenebrae, and it's featured throughout.
Right. So the argument was basically by the reformers was that, and this comes out of the decree in 55, was that, well, attendance has been declining since the Middle Ages on these services. And there's a lot of historical counters examples you can make to that. First of all, a lot of packed Holy Week services here and there in different areas or whatever. But on the other hand, there's also a great deal of historical reasons for that with revolutions and all this stuff too happening. But on the other hand, there's also this denigration of all the people's devotions that they love to do, that have a great deal of meaning for them. So like Good Friday, morning service, morning mass, and then they had many extravagant processions of the stations around, outside,
public
passion plays, long. There was the tradition of the preaching of the 7 words, last words of Christ.
The 7 last words sermon on Friday was hugely popular.
So these are these big popular things, and then you have this top down. I mean, talk about elites. I mean, you just have these experts, literally 10, I think there's 10 people who impose on the whole faithful and the most central and most well-loved moment in the entire liturgical year. They impose a complete restructuring of the entire week so that all these things then suddenly are up in the air. All these things that they used to do with the timing as they had been, that had a great attendance from the faithful, are now cast aside, and they want everybody to be enthusiastic about their new rite that they altered and made more participatory. And they want everybody to just get in line with that and cast aside their devotions, or at least denigrate them in some way. So I think it's hard to emphasize this too much, because to me it's like these are what the faithful are doing, and it's so important to so many souls.
Yes.
And that's what's so disorienting and for everybody, is that the church authorities come in and just suppress that, and just, well, what happened to this thing that I've always prayed since I was a boy, and always, I had this conversion experience when I did this, and that, now everything's just altered because a bunch of experts think that all these devotions are just sort of not that good, to just stop it. So that's the non-pastoral nature of this whole thing beginning at 55.
Yep. The important thing here is that this Holy Week is at least as old as 800, probably older. It shows signs of pre-Carolingian liturgy. I just finished reading this great book called Greek Popes, and I can't remember the rest of it, but it was basically talking about how from Gregory the Great up until around 800, all the popes were Greek speaking, and the liturgy became bilingual again, and they brought in Greek into the divine office, and they started bringing the ceremonial of Constantinople into Rome. And then all that kind of happens from 600 into 800, and then you have Charlemagne, and then you have a major standardization of the Roman Rite moving forward from 800 out of that. That's kind of the liturgical contour of what scholars have put together, and this seems right to me. But it seems, and I've heard scholars say this, that the Holy Week is, we're peeking through, there's a hole in the wood, or we're peeking through the veil. This is where we peek through to see the oldest expression of who we are as Roman Rite Catholics, is the pre-55 Holy Week. If you want, the way that the deacon leads the prayers on Good Friday, for example, even the way the vestments are worn, not maybe the Baroque folded chasubles, but the old folded chasubles, the progress of all the lessons on Holy Saturday, all these things. This is showing you early Roman Christianity, early Roman liturgy. So it's really a shame. And I think we could say that if you were the devil and you wanted to blow up the liturgy, the bullseye is Holy Week. Everything that we do the rest of the year comes out of Holy Week. The Mass was instituted on Maundy Thursday. The sacrificial oblation of Christ happened on Good Friday. The resurrection happened on Easter Sunday, and that's why we have the obligation to attend Mass on Sunday, is because of the resurrection. So everything that we do all year is rooted in Holy Week. So if you're gonna screw it up, if you're gonna mess it up and stretch it and change it and cut and paste and all that, that's where you're going to begin, and that's what Annibale Bugnini did. And it only took, he started this project in 50-51, and by 1969 you had a completely new Roman Rite. I wouldn't say new and improved, because it wasn't. The stats and the numbers show that it did not help faith, and it did not help participation. It reduced attendance. So this is important. This is kind of the apologetics moment of today's show, and that is, yes, the Society of St. Pius X will say, yeah, but there's nothing heretical or contrary to faith or, what's the phrase we were using the other day, Timothy, against pious ears?
Yeah,
offensive to pious ears.
Ears.
There's nothing offensive to pious ears. The 62 is still good. Let's not quibble. And I think we should say, well, look, if we're really going to affirm the Latin Mass and the Roman Rite, as you said before, Timothy, something that existed from 1951 to and then up to 1962, that's an 11-year period. If we're going to go through a traditional liturgy renaissance, let's not stop there and capture this aberrant Holy Week that just existed from, if you're going to count the 1951 to 1962. No. And I understand Lefebvre didn't want to ruffle feathers in Rome. He didn't want to be too aggressive. He didn't want it to look like everything had to go back before John the 23rd. I get all that. There's a prudential move there. But now it's 2020. And you've got even FSSP, Instituted Christ the King, diocesans who are requesting orders, Benedictines, they're requesting we want the pre-55 because this is our patrimony and this is our legacy.